Good morning. I don't know which was more difficult, to know that we're following Kim or to follow the kids.
Yeah.
This will be good. No, I'm excited to introduce Mollie Lombardi. We're going to talk about technology innovation and where we're going to be headed in the near future.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us this morning. Skip was just introduced, so from TriBridge. I'd also like to introduce Mike Bollinger, Vice President and Thought Leader from Cornerstone OnDemand, and Nick Kouma, who has an even longer title than Skip, Worldwide Leader, Watson Career Coach, Financial Services Sector, IBM, Watson Talent Management Solutions. Did I get it right?
I don't know.
Okay. He knows some cool stuff about AI. So let's get into the questions. I know we only have about a half an hour here, so I'll start with you, Skip. You know, we heard about innovation from the kids, and we've heard about innovation throughout the whole conference here. What are the things, innovations that you've seen have the most impact on talent management and learning in particular, but that you think have really impacted our ability to execute?
Sure. So, you know, I love the talent space, but learning and performance is really where my background lies, and we're just in an exciting time. Innovation has never been at this extent, this pace in the space. And it's doing some interesting things. And you're hearing lots of interesting debates, things like, is the LMS dead? Now, let me put that to rest. It is not happening. But what we are going to see is two things happening. One, platforms are going to be innovating as fast as you can imagine. You saw some of the new stuff coming from Cornerstone. If you've been down to the vendor hall downstairs, you're seeing a lot of the new technologies that are out there. But so you're seeing lots of really powerful technologies that are actually changing how we're engaging our workforce. And it's really shifting things. The other part of that is actually around integrations. The level of integration that's happening now is, that in and of itself is very exciting. So you see what's going on with Cornerstone, what's going on in the partner ecosystem, the ability to take the right tools to the right place at the right time is a really powerful shift for us.
Yeah. And that ability to experience, as humans, we experience our day as not siloed different functions, and now the technology is able to deliver that as well.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts, Mike?
Well, I think, you know, I agree totally with Skip, and I think the other thing that we're starting to see is as this ecosystem grows of the content and the various other parts that are being part of the learning experience platform, we have to be mindful of the fact that our audience now is a self-directed learner. And as a self-directed learner, there's both a push and a pull mentality. So the opportunity now for us is something that we've talked about for 10 or 20 years, which is, where does learning embed itself? And it embeds itself in every moment of the employee journey. It embeds itself in the onboarding connection. It embeds itself when I have my own career conversations with my manager. It embeds itself when I have that moment where I want to go learn something new at those moments that matter. So that extension of the technology also needs to extend into those processes.
Even to the 2-minute conversations that Kim was just talking about, right? That you learn something from those every day too.
Correct.
And I like that when you think about critical moments. Being a part of IBM, there's no shortage of training and learning content. Within IBM, we refer to something called Think 40, where every single IBMer is expected to do 40 hours of learning on a yearly basis. The best training I did, by the way, so far this year was the GDPR compliance training. Absolutely my favorite.
Everybody's favorite.
Everybody's favorite. No, in all sincerity, though, when we think about a culture for learning and how technology is sort of reacting and influencing it, we're sort of shifting from compliance to employability when we think about skill development for the future. And it's important that technology is reflective of that. So.
Well, and Nick, you talked a little bit about what IBM is doing in terms of training, but you've also spent a little bit of time thinking about how humans interact with artificial intelligence, the Watson. So tell us, what are some of your point of views on how we should think about interacting with robots that are coming, artificial intelligence?
I like how you phrased the question, Mollie. The word interaction means that it's sort of implied that there will be some form of interaction between humans and AI. And I think there's a lot of people that are afraid that they won't have the possibility to interact or to influence, and this concept of singularity, believe it or not, is now part of a lot of discussions that we're in the middle of. So happy to report, when we think about AI and we think about bots, it's really an extension of human expertise or augmenting that human capability. It's not so much around replacement, but rather sort of an extension of that capability. One example, if you go to the IBM careers site, you have the possibility to interact with Watson. Now, for an IBMer and maybe for some of our clients, Watson is synonymous with artificial intelligence for us. Watson is on our career site to support individuals finding a job which is most suitable for them. We trained Watson on 60 common questions that recruiters get. And so it's sort of guiding and coaching an individual to find the best job for them.
And it's sort of interesting when you think about, will we control the robots, will they control us? But I think, to your point, when they're best used, they help us get to the human decisions faster, right?
Yeah.
So I'll open this up to all three of you, but there's been some concern about if we're programming the robots or the artificial intelligence, will it pick up our biases? Will it just accelerate the application of our bias as well?
Well, I think we've seen early examples of that happening. I think Microsoft had a faux pas happen with that and some others where they picked up some not so great traits. I think we'll see some of that. But I think that's also part of the learning process, right? That we'll see that evolution happen and we'll trip and fall. And I'm constantly telling my team, if you're not trying hard enough to make things happen, if you are trying hard enough, you're going to be falling, you're going to stumble, make mistakes, but that's just part of the process.
Yeah.
One of the things that we think about a lot in TLAS, by the way, TLAS does not stand for three-letter acronyms. It stands for Thought Leadership and Advisory Services.
Well, we like a good three-letter acronym, though.
But we think a lot about a variant on that, which is robotic process automation.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can go collect data from various points, you can automate that and remove the human from the data entry, and that process automation goes with that as well. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as time goes by, particularly in shared service centers and those kinds of things. But it also has an implication of bias in terms of how is that data collected and transformed as you go through that process. So we need to be mindful of that as we turn more of that data entry over.
Yeah.
The only comment I would add to that, if I may, I think most organizations have a D&I function or access to D&I research, and this is really becoming more than just something nice to have, something which sort of helps an organization present itself. D&I insights are becoming actionable when we think about AI. It's important that we are using that to inform Watson, to inform any form or any piece of AI so that we overcome human biases, especially those unconscious ones, which there's around 100 documented ones. It's critical that we teach artificial intelligence to overcome that, and then we start to truly extend the best of the best when it comes to human expertise.
Yeah. And just for anyone, it's only a two-letter acronym, but D&I, diversity and inclusion. So
sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of both people, I feel like, that are afraid of the robots taking over and the people who want them to take over are both wrong, right? The human at the end of the day still is going to have to make the decisions, we hope. So Mike, I'll ask this one to you. What do you think have been the biggest sort of innovations and changes in the last 5 to 7 years that you've seen that have, and what do you think is the next wave? What do you see coming in the next 5 or 7 years is going to disrupt how we think about learning and talent management?
It's a really interesting question, and it can go a variety of different ways. If you think about the fact that the iPhone's only been around 10 years, right?
Which is, what did we do before that?
Looking around,
I don't
exactly,
remember.
and Adam talked about that in the keynote. But if to look into 2028 is almost difficult to do. So I think about it in terms of what were the moments that caused the technology trigger. Gartner has this notion of a hype cycle where there's some trigger and then everybody has this peak of inflated expectations and then this trough of disillusionment as they realize it's hard and they finally figure something out. I think the seminal moment for us in the last 5 to 7 years was the way we became and behaved as consumers. Yeah. The consumer environment that we had set an expectation for ourselves as how we wanted to interact as employees. We wanted to be able to choose the time, choose the channel, choose the mechanism, and make sure that that feedback that we did solicit from our HR department was the same as we would get from a sales department. So that consumer expectation then caused those technology triggers, everything from mobility to the user interface and user experience that we talk about to the learning experience platform we're here today. So I see that as the moment, if you will, the real innovation trigger.
I think that's such an interesting way to think about it too. It's not the technology, it's the technology meeting a moment of human need or a realization. Yeah.
Yep.
Skip, any other thoughts on that?
You know, it's interesting just watching how the expectations are evolving, right? So to kind of tag on what Mike was saying, the consumer experience is feeding a lot of those behaviors and a lot of the expectations, and I think the pace at which that's happening is just continuing to accelerate.
Agree.
And it's going to drive even more change than we're anticipating today. So if we look out to 2028, I believe Bill Gates had a good quote about we're always underestimating what we can get done in the next 10 years. We'll overestimate what's coming up and underestimate what we can actually get done long term. So I think we're going to see some really amazing things in the next 10 years.
Anything from you?
Can I be provocative?
I would hope so, please.
Too late.
Now you have to be.
Yeah. The last 5 to 7 years, I think over the last decade, we've just had a strong focus on moving existing technologies to the cloud. And that sort of slowed down innovation slightly. We were really trying to round out this chapter of standardization so we can step into an era of cognitive and AI. And so very excited about the future. I think that we're going to see rapid and immeasurable innovation, especially as we get into it.
Go ahead.
I was going to add one other point to that. Nick brought up a good point, that what's happening right now is we're seeing so much data come out of the systems now.
Yeah.
That whole migration, now we're having access to just massive information. And not only is it feeding the AI tools and machine learning, but just our access to the data, start looking at how we're driving business impact, right? So I think you're going to see that jump tenfold over the next several years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how we as humans keep up with that constant influx of information. I mean, we think about, we use data to decide where to go to dinner. We use data to decide what kind of car to buy. And now we're using data in work, and so how we sort of absorb that data and that change that's happening so rapidly. So Skip, coming back to you, what do you think about the ownership of learning? We talked about the consumerization, but who's going to own what I know? How do I, you don't necessarily work for the same company for your whole career, and they don't have your training record. How do you see that evolving?
So I'll actually start by talking about learning experience, and you look at it from a learning experience perspective. That's become very popular in the last couple of years on driving learner experience and learner engagement. That's come from the individual, the expectations, the demands that they're driving. I think what's going to happen here is the learner is going to own the transcript. They're going to own their record, whether we like it or not. You look at what's happening in spaces outside of HR. Nick mentioned GDPR, right? So the rules and regulations around who has control of what data are already forcing the shifts of many of those things. So if you kind of extrapolate where we're headed just based on those indicators alone, that expectation is not only just going to be the baseline, but they will take control of it for sure.
Do you see sort of their lines of demarcation, not necessarily age-wise, but are there different sort of learner types that may be more adaptable to that ownership of learning?
Well, so I actually think that it's even going to end up being broader than the learning transcript, all right? So GDPR is a significant driver, and so what we're talking about is data privacy is almost an area of dignity. And John Sumser actually had a great comment from HR Examiner, had a great comment where he said the way that you treat your people's data is going to translate into the way they treat your data. So I think there's going to be an expectation of the portable CV where I own my own resume, which includes my learning transcript, my job history, and all those kinds of things. And as you start thinking about technologies like blockchain and how that could interpret, if I carry that entire record with me, I can then give that piece to my prospective employer, which reflects all those experiences that I've had, including the learning experience and the learning transcript, as well as everything from my past job histories to potentially performance reviews to compensation histories and so on. So I think eventually what you're seeing in GDPR was a symptom of this desire, is us owning everything about us and giving it out in pieces when it's necessary to our chain partners then. So that's what I look for in the next 5 to 10 years in that area.
And that brings up an interesting conundrum for people entering the workforce or people who are in the workforce. It's a very different way of managing your career and thinking about how you get a job. I mean, how you sort of advertise yourself as well.
Well,
That learning transcript's critical to that job.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nick.
No, it's okay. Employability, like I mentioned a bit earlier, when we think about owning the learning transcript, it really is coming down to the individual, and how it's presented by the organization is important, but at the end of the day, there's learning content and assets that are well outside of the confines of an organization. Within IBM, we encourage the concept of building our talent, not necessarily buying it. And so strong focus on internal talent mobility and skill development to do so. And we use Watson to open up career paths for individuals that aren't necessarily immediately visible, and attach learning content specifically to that career path.
Yeah. I find that fascinating and also scary, because I wonder, do we miss the serendipity, or are we actually introducing more serendipity by exposing people to more career paths? But so one other important question is, how are we going to measure the impact of some of these innovations in the organization? Is it going to change how we have to think about measuring learning? And Mike, maybe I'll start with you.
So TLAS works in a value realization capacity with our customers. And a lot of times you'll hear, so where's the ROI? And I remember seeing a commercial not too long ago. It was Charter Communications, and they said, and I'm not calling them out, and they said, hey, we've got this 60 megabit to the home and so on into the business, and that's maximum ROI. And at that point, I thought it's jumped the shark. ROI is one of those household terms. So what we talk about within TLAS around these things is threefold. And the first one is you have to be able to align your business strategy and your talent strategy together in order to measure. When you do measure, you need to be able to show demonstrably that those strategies are aligned. And then finally, those measurements need to actually hit business outcomes. So when you think about business outcomes, you need to think about, I think, just 4 big drivers, because we can measure all kinds of things, from turnover to engagement to levels of consumption of various components, but they all translate back to 4 business drivers, and we have to be able to tell a value story to our executive teams. And those 4 drivers are pretty simple. I'm going to increase revenue, increase customer sat, decrease risk, decrease cost. So as long as your strategy aligns to the articulated business strategy, and then you're able to attach that to a business outcome, you'll have a mechanism by which you can tell that story, and you're not using the hated ROI word. Now, don't get me wrong, eventually you have to demonstrate ROI, but you don't want to start with that.
Yeah, I think you do raise an interesting point too. We have all this data, but throwing data over the wall isn't useful. How do we tell the stories and find the stories in the
Not
data
about the
that's
number,
meaningful?
right.
Yeah.
With the ROI piece, proud moment being a person who's actively chose HR for a profession.
Yeah.
Earlier this year, HR.
Good job.
Yeah, woo.
HR.
No, so earlier this year we had the big IBM event in Las Vegas. And so today there's a couple thousand people at Convergence. We had 40,000 people in one room, in one auditorium. And Ginny Rometty, the CEO of IBM, looking after 350,000 people, got on stage and started talking about HR. And she told the story around how when we infused, throughout the course of 2017, when we infused AI, specifically Watson, into our HR processes and practice, it showed a $100 million ROI for her in 2017. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I still get goosebumps when I talk about it, when I hear it. Our CEO was on stage in front of the most important audience she has in the year and talked about HR. And it was a fantastic ROI moment for us. Very proud moment.
I think we are seeing that more and more, and in part because we have the data. We're able to speak a language that executives are more comfortable with and able to, communicate the value in that way.
Yeah.
Skip, to you?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. If we look back, when LMSs first started coming out, the L&D departments are going, yay, we can track what's going on, and we can actually be meaningful to the organization. It didn't take long to realize that it wasn't very helpful. Yes, we completed a course, great. We met the compliance requirements. But we fast forward 20 years and look at where we are today, and more importantly, look where we are going forward. Yeah. We've touched on several points that are just going to lead to really understanding, the HR organization is driving the business, and it is now something that is much more common to see and hear large company leaders talking about those aspects of the organization driving the business, because it becomes about the people, it becomes about the team members in the organization.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting to see too, people are realizing that it's not about, it's not just about the dollar return, but also about how do you enable that, the business result, right? Somewhere along the way, HR and learning got a bad rap for serving the business, right? And what could be a higher calling than making sure we have the people with the skills to execute on the business, right? We talk about getting a seat at the table. It's like, we are the table, right? You're the part of the organization that's designed to deliver the skills and talent, to move the business forward. And I think people are really recognizing that now. It's great. Nick, what do you see on the fringe of innovation, whether it's in AI or bots, that you think are things that we might need to be looking at in the future that could disrupt talent management or learning?
The concept of a chatbot sort of has a lifespan that we'll see go through quite quickly. Where a chatbot is there to reflect feedback, we start to get into a chat agent, which is there to reactively complete tasks for you, and then get into a sort of an assistant where you're being proactively recommended and receiving guidance. So like yesterday, the keynote from Adam, it was a fantastic view into the executive assistant, where it's a voice-activated or voice-enabled approach on getting a view, a lens on his business. And that's exactly the type of direction I see us headed. It was fantastic to see that yesterday.
I love the word you use, lens. I think about that all the time, because I feel like AI and bots are kind of where mobile and social were 10 or 15 years ago. People were like, I need some, but I don't really know what it means,
Yeah.
And they're just all lenses that are going to continue to evolve. So.
Yeah.
In the last couple minutes, I'll direct a question to all three of you. I'm going to change it up a little bit from what we rehearsed, so hang on. But what is the thing that you think people should avoid in the future that may be sort of a shiny object, and what is something that you think that people need to walk out of here doing right away and sort of taking with them? And we'll start with you.
So, in my role on the technology side of the business and the product side of the business, this will sound odd, but technology for technology's sake is really the key. We're in an era of solution for the organization and not really looking at what's the great tool to pick. I often have conversations, people come to me, they'll say, hey, we're thinking about this tool. Thinking about it for what?
Right.
What are you looking to do? What problems are you trying to solve? What direction are you trying to lead for your organization? That actually will lead to what solutions you're going to use, and more importantly, how you use those solutions. And that becomes the key.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that more and more. The shiny object syndrome happens, but I think that it's shorter because people are realizing there's always another object, but what's really fit to purpose, what's really, and also not just the purpose, but also your culture. We're seeing that a lot too. People are looking for technology that supports their point of view on talent, as well as the functionality they need. So,
a little variant on that, and I agree completely, Skip. And as we think about, one of the things the cloud has done is it's made us more able, if you will, to connect to each other. So whatever shiny object you need to avoid is probably one of those things that's going to be more difficult to integrate with, because as we see software starting to develop itself and so on, and we start looking at stateful services, in other words, my ability to interact with another service from another provider or another vendor, or even out somewhere else in the cloud, if I'm not embracing that platform concept, that shiny object, whatever the technology is you're looking for, that's probably something to avoid if you can't have that integration point. So that's, to me, a criteria as I have a conversation with individuals around the thing that they want to buy. How are you going to fold that into the rest of your ecosystem?
Yeah, and people are used to that. You mentioned the iPhone, right? The iPhone stays the same. You have the relationship with the phone and not the apps, right? And so how do you manage that in an enterprise scale? What does that mean for your company, and what do you swap in and out, and where's the relationship? So, yeah.
Yep.
Pick an area that has a high likelihood of being successful. So not only segmenting according to something that isn't just shiny, but shiny and meaningful or impactful, and then ensure that you have the data, you have the organizational taxonomy defined, so that way when you roll it out, it has the propensity to be a visible success. That way you can then start to scale outward and build on top of it.
Yeah, one of the best ways to get adoption is to find a pain point and solve it, right? Yeah. It's always, then it becomes more of a pull than a push as well. Yeah. It's really interesting to think about innovation in this space as well, because I really think that, it's about purpose fit now. It's not just about for its own sake. And I think we're really realizing that, we're human beings, so we're messy, and we don't perform to statistical norms very well. So it can be difficult to, apply data to human beings, but I think we're really getting to the point where we're able to get the best of data and the best of the human decision making and moving organizations forward. So thank you all so much for your thoughts and insights, and thank you all for your time and attention. And I think we have a break following this, and we'll gather in the breakout sessions after that. So I hope we continue the discussion,
Mollie.
and have a great day.